Wait for it. Wait for it. And we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Mr. Herman Hunter, introduce himself to our listeners and viewers at home.
Hey, I'm Herman Hunter.
Okay.
I'm a fantasy author. I'm a fantasy author. Boy, that was awkward. Yeah, I'm a fantasy author. I have 4 books. Well, I'll have 4 books out now. Actually, technically 5, but that was before I called myself Herman Hunter. So,
okay. The next part of the introduction is where we first met them. So once upon a time, we were actually both locked in the same writing dungeon by our publishers. Turns out the 2 different companies shared a facility for their, black side operations. Who knew? But luckily, the pen really is mightier than the sword, and Herman stabbed them in the eye, and we got free. And here we are.
Yep. I want my pen back, though.
Yeah, we should have grabbed it on the way out. I don't know what we were thinking.
Give me back my pen. It's like that kid.
Just blame the gruel. I'm sure they were like drugging it or something. At least
like
that's what we tell our parole officers.
It's like that kid from that movie, Better Off Dead. $2. $2.
I would have gone more with the. Have you seen my stapler?
Here's a Bistouch stapler, and they replaced it with a swing line, but I want my Bistouch back.
All right, so before we get too deep into this episode, we do have to do the religion question. So are you ready for this, Herman?
I'm ready.
All right. Independence Day, Battle Los Angeles, or Mars Attacks?
Battle Los Angeles.
Go on, why?
I just thought it was a cooler movie. I mean, the Independence Day was one of those big blockbuster spectaculars, but Battle Los Angeles was really kind of gritty. And I don't want to say it was realistic because, most Marines don't go up against aliens, but it was ugly and nasty and gritty. And Mars Attacks is very funny and very campy, but I kind of like that sort of that gritty, sort of realistic aspect. I mean, Independence Day really didn't have that kind of didn't have that sort of realistic feel to it. It felt like I was watching Black Hawk Down with aliens.
Yeah. I did like that one line, the Jewish scientist's father, and I've seen him on stuff.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name. He's got a face you recognize and a name you forget. But he had that one line where he's like, I'm the president. Why didn't I know there were aliens at Area 51? And he's like, what, you think we really spent $500 for a hammer?
Yeah.
Oh, that was one of the best lines. Then when they were doing the praying, he had that when the person was going to pray with him. He goes, I'm not Jewish. And he goes, no one's perfect.
Yeah.
Those are just such classic one-liners that you could just kind of slip in. Yeah. And I dig it. So
I can't remember that guy, but I remember the show he was on was called Dear John. It was
I've seen that one.
Yeah, TV show. I can't remember the name. But I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, it had the guy that from Jurassic Park that we spent so long figuring out if we could. We forgot to ask if we should. Dr. Malcolm. It was that actor was the scientist again. He plays a really good scientist.
Yeah, Jeffrey Goldblum.
Yeah.
I'm kind of a Jeffrey Goldblum fan. I like a lot of his stuff.
He did one where he was like with this really weird blonde chick that had like crimpy hair, like crimped hair that was all the rage in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
That was pretty good too, but I can't remember the name of it. Like supposedly she spoke to spirits and he didn't believe her. And then it got weird. But you can't go wrong with a Goldblum movie.
No. In fact, one of the first movies I ever saw him in was a 70s horror movie. It was called The Sentinel.
Okay.
And he was a photographer. And there was a lot of upcoming stars. There was the one who played Commander Kira. She was in that at the very end, and Berenger. What's that guy's last name? But anyways, he was in a lot of movies. He was in Platoon. He was in Major League. I want to say the name is Berenger. He was in that too at the very end. So a very old 70s movie, but it had a lot of like up and coming stars that were in it.
There are some movies like that. Have you seen Taps?
Yeah.
That had some serious names in there too before they were names.
Yeah. Tom Cruise. I want to say Kevin. I could be wrong. Kevin Bacon was in that.
I think so.
And a bunch of other ones.
It was filmed at Valley Forge Military Academy in Pennsylvania, and I drove by that a couple times when I was living there for grad school. So it's funny that obviously it's a made up facility for the movie.
Yeah, but yeah, you could see some of those old guys. And there was one he was in with Lawrence Fishburne. I want to say it was called Deep Cover or something like that. That was another great movie. Jeff Goldblum plays this sort of scummy lawyer gangster. It's just.
So I just looked real quick. It's Tom Cruise. Sean Penn was in that movie.
Sean Penn. Yeah, that was I remember that.
Before, when he was a young man, George C. Scott. I recognize him from something. I can't remember.
Oh, Patton, Exorcist 3.
Okay, Exorcist. That would be where.
George C. Scott is another one of my favorites. Dr. Strangelove.
No, that's an excellent movie.
Yeah, he was the general in Dr. Strangelove.
That scene where he rides the bomb down.
No, that was crap. That wasn't George C. Scott. George C. Scott was the one who's talking about the planes, and he's like, he's in the war room. I want to say Rip Torn, but it's not Rip Torn. I don't think that was the guy, but that was the guy who got on the bomb. He was the pilot of the bomber. I want to say it was Rip Torn, but it's not Rip Torn. I forget who it was, but it was one of those guys.
Nice. It's funny how some of the movies that made us, and then you remember the movie, years go by, the details fade.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's right.
Well, I'm getting old.
Yeah, I watched that in the early 2000s as part of a history of film class as an undergrad.
Yeah.
And so it was a slow semester, and they needed to fill something with an elective. And I'm like, this sounds easy. I could sleep through this one. And then turned out we liked half the movies we got to watch, which was kind of weird. Coming from my generation, because I was born in 81, watching anything in black and white on purpose just felt weird. Like I think that was one of that and Miracle on 34th Street are the first two movies I watched that were actually black and white.
Mm-hmm. Oh, really? Yeah, my mom was a huge movie buff, but hers were like those old time movies, and she loved musicals and all that. So I'd end up having to watch half of them. I really didn't like a lot of black and white movies. I liked more of the stuff that came out in like the later 60s, 70s era, and that had more of an edge to it. But some of them were pretty good. I mean, like I said, Dr. Strangelove being one of them.
I mean, a lot of the spaghetti westerns I used to watch were black and white originally, but a lot of them were digitally remastered by the time I watched them.
Mm-hmm.
So I never saw the original. Black and white. I mean, I've seen some of them since then, like the Lone Ranger, but it isn't something I go back to often because there's so many good movies now. And when I was in undergrad, so from 2000 to 2004, doing the undergrad and then deployed, and then 2005 I was gone again, and then grad.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was just life was crazy. So I had a whole almost 15-year window where I didn't really watch any movies. So I guess I'm making up to do. It's been fun. Of course, then you end up revisiting your favorites, like some of the old TV series you never finished because if you missed an episode, you just missed it back in the day. It wasn't like you could just DVR it or
no. Well, I mean, the thing is when they went on because they were running off of seasons. When the season was over, they do the replay. And if and then the next season, when the season ended, they would do the replay of some of the older ones. So Lost in Space was a prime example of a series that started out as black and white and ended up as color. So I think one season was black and white, and then they went Technicolor with the second season.
That was an excellent one. Danger, Will Robinson, danger.
Yeah, danger.
Did you watch the?
My aching back.
Did you watch the Netflix reboot of it?
No. Matter of fact, I dumped Netflix after Cuties. So
Oh, okay, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that, to be honest.
And I don't know what, I haven't had any. The only thing that I really miss out of Netflix has been Stranger Things. I haven't. I really like Stranger. I really like I think the first three seasons, but after that, I never had a feeling to go back.
Yeah. I wonder sometimes why I pay for it because I'm so busy I don't have time to sit down and actually watch anything. I've been looking at that for budgeting too, as the wallet keeps getting stretched thinner and thinner and food prices go up. So I definitely feel you. But all right, so since we're not done with these religion questions, we are polytheistic here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. So Hook, Jumanji, or The Fifth Element?
Fifth Element.
Okay, go on. All of them were excellent.
Dallas Multipass.
Yes. Luckily for this one, I liked all 6 of the movies I picked, so there really was not a wrong answer. The trick was why you liked each movie that made it fun. But
I wasn't a big fan of Hook or Jumanji, even though I'm a huge Robin Williams fan. They just didn't interest me. The Fifth Element incorporates sci-fi camp, and it has a feeling of a who's the guy who did Brazil?
Not familiar with that.
Yeah, no, he was a Monty Python guy, and I can't remember his name now. But he did Brazil, he did Jabberwocky. He was the American, and I can't remember his name, but it had that sort of feeling of a movie. Maybe he did do the movie or not. I'm not quite sure. But it was like sci-fi and camp and comedy all bound together, and it was like a shot out of the blue. Whereas, you had like with Hook and Jumanji, you had traditional movies that have had fantasy elements. This was like completely out of nowhere.
Yeah, but I liked all of them, but The Fifth Element, it was definitely leaned into the camp, which I really dig. There's room in my heart for all the cheesy B movies. I love them all. Given who played Dallas Corbin, I don't know that you could call it was B movie because it was too well funded.
Yeah,
but it had that feel to it.
Yeah, Ruby Rod.
Yeah, that was hilarious. And the funny scene was like that driver where Dallas Corbin, where he's the taxi driver.
Yeah,
that's how I imagine New York City taxi drivers drive. I've never been there, but just based on all the the TV you see set there, I'm like, yeah, he probably learned to drive in New York.
Yeah.
So that was just classic. And then, like you mentioned, with the Ruby Rod, hilarious. There are a lot of movies that I would enjoy a sequel or a remake just because I love the property so much to see what they could do with it with modern tech.
Yeah,
I don't think there's any way you improve on The Fifth Element because you would lose that awe feeling you get the first time you watch it. I don't know if awe is
exactly,
word, but you lose that. Oh my goodness, what am I looking at? Vibe.
Exactly.
As much as I love Jurassic Park because I love dinosaurs, which will lead into our next question in a second. When they play that music every time they see the dinosaurs, it kind of loses its effect because we know there are dinosaurs now. But the first time you watch that, it was special.
Yep. There's just some movies you can't remake. We were talking about, because I'm kind of in with some of the Iron Age guys, and we got into a discussion about remakes of movies. And they're redoing the Lord of the Rings. I think it's Lord of the Rings series, if I remember, or it's either the Hobbit or the Lord of the Rings. And it's like, if somebody tried to redo the Lord of the Rings, the Peter Jackson stuff, don't. It's one of those, like the Lord of the Rings movies. They're just, so much time is invested in those movies. You're not going to make a cheap copy of them because that's what it would take. I mean, these guys spent 18 months doing all 3 movies, shooting straight. They had armorers. They invested so much time and effort into these movies that a cheap copy is not going to even. It's not. It just won't compare.
That's actually one of the reasons that for a lot of people, the TV show of the Lord of the Rings. Well, the Lord of the Rings was also, they didn't follow the canon. But aside from the canon issues, because I get when you come into someone else's property, sometimes the canon can be a barrier to storytelling.
Mhm.
Obviously, generally speaking, if you talk to the creator, you can work your way around that if you're conscientious of the property you're writing in. But I understand how difficult that can be as a creator. I've written in other people's worlds, so I can give you a little bit of a pass on that. But the first Lord of the Rings movie series, they set the bar so high on what good fantasy can be, from costuming to armor to the swords and such, that you watch the Lord of the Rings of Power, you watch the Wheel of Time, and it's like, compared to that, this is like we're watching a High School Musical being performed.
Exactly.
Performed badly because the bar is so high. And if you did it once, you could do it again. And I'd bet it'd even be cheaper to do that same level of quality because the costuming is so much better with the ability to 3D print stuff.
Yes. So it's just
cheap. And then like the specifically with the Rings of Power, I watched it because I wanted to like it. I'm a huge Tolkien fan. I've been binging, just reserved a couple of his biographies from the library because like his life is fascinating. But like that scene where they're in the lost city where the rings are being formed, that Elven stronghold, and you realize that they had maybe 12 extras for the crowd, and then they just replicated them 100 times, and they didn't even like go quickly change costumes and we'll move you around and then we can reuse this film. They're literally the exact same thing. So it's very obvious, like watching a Where's Waldo on film. I'm like, okay, there he is. There he is. Oh, there he is again.
Yeah, I mean, they just didn't, you know, they didn't make the effort. And if you're gonna, I'm of the opinion, if you're gonna do something, do it right.
Absolutely.
And they didn't. They just wanted to throw something out there that had a lot of glitz and glam and didn't really have a lot of depth. The Lord of the Rings had depth. It had commitment. There's just so much there. You're not going to compete with it. And then that's the thing that happened with like the Wheel of Time movies. When I watched the Wheel of Time movies, it started out like a generic fantasy movie, where you have this village and everybody's happy and everybody gets along, and and then it gets overrun by these Trollocs, and it's like, this is up there with some of the worst fantasy stuff I've seen. I get the impression that Hollywood and the entertainment complex does not understand fantasy at all.
Or sci-fi.
Sci-fi. I mean, there are a few that do, and they're not listened to. Of course, Ridley Scott kind of understood sci-fi, but I don't know what the hell happened to him. He also understood fantasy. If you've ever seen that movie Legend, that is like a dark fairy tale. Yeah, the European version was very well done. They hacked it up for the U.S. version, but you've seen the Lord Darkness with the devil costume, is Tim Curry, the devil costume with those huge black horns.
Oh yeah,
that's Legend.
No, it's a good one. Definitely back in the day, that was date movie quality.
Yeah,
it's, and it could be done well. I get to a point like cost is an issue, right? When you're trying to transfer to the screen, and I'm willing to go with the movie theaters when they do that. But it's almost like sometimes they don't like the property they're converting.
Well, like I said, a lot of people in the entertainment complex, they do not understand fantasy, and it is very clear. And it's the stuff that they pump out that there are so few good fantasy movies, and then because there are so few people who understand them. And it's like the guy who did Conan, and I forget his name, but he was a big screenwriter. He understood Robert E. Howard, and he understood Conan because he had the same mentality. And those two movies that's the reason why those two movies are so iconic.
Did you watch the Jason Momoa reboot?
Yeah, I actually kind of liked it because it had that sort of pulpy feel, but it wasn't the two iconic movies. It didn't have the same impact. It didn't have the same gravitas as those two movies. And the book for the second movie actually kind of sucked because I read it. It kind of sucked. It wasn't that good.
Yeah, for me, Mimosa will always be Ronan Dex. So,
but I actually kind of like the Jason Momoa one. It was I remember seeing that image of the skull cave on the seashore, and like, God,
yeah,
that looks so Frazetta. That looks so Conan, and the whole bringing back his dead wife and the daughter who's a sorceress, that really rang of what something like Robert E. Howard would write. I really loved it. That part I loved. But I did have to admit, I fell asleep during portions of the movie because it.
Did they reuse the iconic line to what is the purpose of the purpose of life?
I don't remember that.
Hear the defeat your enemies and push them before you and hear the lamentations of their woman. Something.
Yeah.
I'm butchering the quote. I'd have to Google it to get it right, and I'm just
have them driven before you in chains and hear the lamentation of their women. Hear the
Yes.
lamentation of their women.
Yeah. So, all right. So you've been on here before, but it's been 2 years. We've revamped how we do the show since then. So we decided rather than talk about the sequel book, we're going to talk about the kind of the whole thing. But before we get started on that, we'll come back to the Revenant and the Cult series after the commercial. Before that, so how did you get into writing? Oh, wait a minute. I will come back to how you get to writing. We forgot to finish the religion questions. Favorite dinosaur, because I knew you looked up how to spell this before we started.
Spinosaurus.
Okay. Yeah, some of the Latin for these dinosaur names are not phonetic.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the one. Actually, it occurred. I think it's the one that showed up in Jurassic Park 3. The long, it's got like a big fin back, and it's got the long snout.
It's pronounced Spinosaurus, but it's spelled Spinosaurus. That gets me sometimes too.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. But yeah, all right. So
tomato.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hard of hearing. I can get it wrong all the time. So, because we are civilized human beings here at the Blasters and Blades podcast, we are no longer knuckle dragging troglodytes. Coffee or tea, and how do you take it?
Coffee, black.
Like your soul. Dun, dun, dun.
Yes.
Okay.
Black and bitter.
Full of hate and discontent.
My soul is enough to take enamel off your teeth.
There's that old meme about nobody sacrifices their enemies and turns their skull into a mug because it's reusable. I've seen that comic strip floating around, and for a while, one of the like a lot of the vet bros, that when they left the army or the military in general after GWAT, they either started a T-shirt company or a coffee company, and one of those was like Bones Coffee, or it's a death themed coffee company. But they actually made a skull mug for a while as a limited edition. I tried to get in, but there were only so many, and I just was not fast enough because that was glorious. They turned the skull into a mug. I loved it. Conan would approve.
Nice gold line mug.
Yeah. All right. So with that out of the way, how did you get into writing?
Well, during a period, I wasn't a real big reader when I was a kid. And then I hit my 30s, and that was actually around the time that the Lord of the Rings stuff came out. And before that, I had read, I'd actually read a few things. One of them was the Douglas Adams, The Hitchhiker's Guide trilogy.
Okay.
And that really resonated with me. For some reason, the humor just sort of resonated with me, which is kind of funny because my stuff is not funny at all. Unless there are some people who think that is. Anyways, but I had friends that got me into D&D and who, were all into Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And it was kind of funny because I kind of I believe I'm autistic, and I have like sort of communications issues and reading issues. And the funny part is when I was reading The Lord of the Rings, it was like I was reading a different book than they were. But the Dungeons and Dragons stuff sort of stuck with me. And the funny thing is I kind of got into the Silmarillion, and that made complete and total sense to me. And then later on, as I got into my 30s, I started reading because I was doing a lot of traveling for work. I was writing software, so I'd have to go travel to customer sites and whatnot. And when I'd fly, I'd read. And I was still a big fantasy buff because I love Dungeons and Dragons. So I'd pick up books, and I ended up reading like the entire Narnia series, Lord of the Rings series. I reread the Silmarillion, got into Conan, and at some point I got into H.P. Lovecraft. And so a lot of these influences, you'll find a lot of these influences in my books. And then I got through all sort of that classic stuff, like the H.G. Wells and all that other stuff. And I started reading modern writers, and I'm like, this sucks. I don't like it. It didn't resonate with me. Those older writers, the sort of the Romantic Age writers, the pulp writers, those guys really sort of resonated with me, and I was unable to find that at that time. Now remember, this is before Amazon was big and self-publishing and all that other stuff. And if you wanted to get something, if you wanted to get, something, you actually go to the library, which usually wasn't very well stocked, or you had to go to a bookstore, which only sold certain books. And so I'm like, well, you know what? Maybe I'll start writing my own stuff. So I got into that. I started writing, and my first few things sucked. I mean, really bad. I've actually deleted them. They were horrible. But then I started writing. I came up with an idea about a character named Frankie. And he was a guy who was pulled into a fantasy world, and he's part of this chosen. He was considered a chosen one. And he has a story, kind of like a trilogy, my own little sort of Lord of the Rings there. And I wrote it, and I gave it to my wife to read, and she was like, what's your opinion? She was like, this is nice. And the translation for that was, this sucks. And so I tried, taking that and going with it. Like, oh, wow, it's great. So I tried publishing it, and I got rejection after rejection after rejection. I had one person say that the story was good, but it needed a lot of revisions. And so at that point, I just sort of stopped. I stopped for about 15, 20 years. And then for some reason, the story of Frankie stayed with me. And so then I picked it up like 15 years later. And for some reason, since that point on, I've been writing. In 2019, I had rewritten the Frankie story, and I was trying to publish it. And I got absolutely no takers. And so I decided, well, I'm going to self-publish. So I did a lot of marketing research. And the first thing that I wrote was a story that I was going to, quote, give away, which was The Revenant and the Tomb. And so this was a novella, and it was going to be a free giveaway if you signed up to my website, and you get a free story. Well, I learned very quickly that, unless you have something that's published, nobody wants anything from you. I think I had about 20 people, and all of them knew me, sign up for my website to get my free story, and that was about it. So then I decided to publish The Revenant and the Tomb, and the first year I sold about 200 and something copies of the book. So I did an audiobook because I figured that's kind of where my audience was. And that's really where I started. And then I had people coming up to me on social media out of the blue saying, so when's the follow-up? So what you're seeing right now with The Revenant and the Cult, that's the follow-up to The Revenant and the Tomb. And I really didn't answer that question. I sort of went off on my own direction, didn't I?
It's okay. I was following. Since you wanted to go there, though, why don't we air that beautiful bean footage? We will throw the commercial up there, and then we'll come back and we'll just start talking about the book that brought us here.
Okay.
So let me cue that commercial up. Come on, I can do this. There we go. Sometimes they rearrange the layout on StreamYards, and I'm like, no, I just figured out where everything was.
The Terran Empire is dead. Long live the Empire. Commander Jared Mertz, the bastard son of the Emperor, and his half-sister, Princess Kelsey, barely speak to one another. To their dismay, their father seizes an opportunity to change that and sends them on a dangerous quest to explore the fallen empire. Separated from home by an impassable gulf and struggling to redefine their relationship, they find themselves thrust into a vicious war. Unless they work together to stop the Empire's deadly legacy, billions face a horrific fate. Empire of Bones, written by Terry Mixon, now available at Amazon.com.
All right, thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. We greatly appreciate you sticking with us. And if you want to support the show, go out and check out the episodes that sponsor us. Thank you, Terry Mixon, for that sponsorship. He is my favorite moon landing faker. He jokingly tells people that is what he did at NASA. He was with the department that faked the moon landing. So, hey, what are you going to do, right? Someone had to do it. You know, paychecks got to get earned, right? All right. So anyway, jokes aside, thank you for spending that or listening to that commercial interlude. And with that, we're going to bring back the topic that Herman was hinting at, which was his series, The Revenant and the Cult, which is a duology that literally just finished. So while you answer these questions, I am going to throw the artwork up. But for those listening at home who have kids that like to read, what would you say the age range for these stories are?
Probably about 16 up. I've had kids who are 11 read it. I don't have sex in my books. I have very little swearing. It's mostly story and scary stuff, and I don't have anything that's I would consider really objectionable. Gore, maybe at best. So my books are very accessible. Like I said, the youngest that I've sold it to was 11 years old, and he absolutely loved it. It was actually one of my first. When I started selling at cons, it was my first sale.
Nice. I hope you signed it for him.
Yeah, I did. Matter of fact, I will be going to a con on the 5th, and I will be doing cons all summer. And generally, when not only do I have event pricing, which is lower than what you get on Amazon, but you also get a signed book and a custom bookmark with each book. So this bookmark for The Revenant, the second book of The Revenant and the Cult, is done by Gabrielle Geske, and I do have one if you want me to show it.
Sure.
Okay, yeah, let me bring it up here. This is
I'm going to put some solo layout so people can see it.
Okay. Let me get the Jason Gant one.
And while you do that up, they can enjoy your glorious mustache.
Yeah. And the nose hairs. Okay. So this is actually the bookmark for the first one, which is done by an artist known as Jason Gant.
It looks good. Oh, there you go. That's perfect distance. That looks good.
Yeah, he does white on a black background. So, and I'm also a co-host on a show called Drawn and Quartered Ultimate Fan Edition, and he's a regular on there. And they every year when I put out a new book, they do a show around some of my characters and creatures, and this is one of the cultists. And nice. I saw Jason's rendering. I'm like, I want to buy that, and I want to put it on a bookmark. And then the other one, this is for the second book, which is The Terror in the Witchwood. Let's see if I can get this to not.
Yeah, it's the glossiness that it doesn't like.
Yeah, it's the gloss.
Yeah, it's very bright. Yeah. Definitely. Is that an angel?
Yeah, that is Hal Cedric, and that is done by Gabrielle Geske. And she did like a Hal Cedric rendering, and that's actually the character, but she also added her sort of like flourish to it, which is sort of angelic. Hal Cedric is the backstory to Hal Cedric is that he was a soldier who died in a war and was restored to life by in the world is known as a prophet. And of course, the prophets are prophets of a god known as the All-Father, which is kind of this is an analog to the one God of Judaism and Christianity. And he is a living embodiment of the All-Father's wrath, and so he's sent out to take down sort of evil elements within the world that I have. And the world that I have is kind of like, it's in the world that we live in. If you're religious, you understand that there are devils and demons, but they exist inside of an invisible world. And unlike this world, but the world that my characters exist in, the devils and demons are very real. And there are four great evils that plague the world and cause all sorts of chaos. And so Hal Cedric is sent as kind of like this sort of avenging force that goes and dispatches or tackles some of these great evils, or the results of some of these great evils. And the first one, he was going to visit the first book, which was The Revenant in the Tomb. He was going to investigate a tomb to make sure that this creature, or this person known as Astaroth, was still entombed. The seals were still intact, and was still trapped within his tomb. And of course, you can understand that probably goes sideways pretty quick. And then the Revenant and the Cult is kind of derivative from that, where he's now dispatched to a region where there's people gone missing. And the region just happens to be in the same area where this Astaroth had a fortress during a period known as the Great War, which was, like a long forgotten historic past. So that's the Astaroth is kind of the linkage between the two books, but it ends up becoming something more. And the funny part is that when I wrote the books, they were written as a single book. And then because the stories kind of were like two separate stories, I decided to divide the book and put out book one, which is Hal Cedric in the Land of the Aurum. And then book two, which is Hal Cedric going to the Witchwood. And that, you get the grand conclusion to this whole sort of like short saga.
So both of the two duologies are set in the same world. Do you foresee writing more in this world?
Oh, yes. Matter of fact, my second book, which is called The Wizard's Stone, is also in this world, but it's a little bit further in the future. And I created a character named Odo that I said, well, I'm going to write one story with this guy and he'll be one and done. Well, not one and done anymore. He's got another book coming out. So all the stories that I'm writing are in this world, and it's the same world that if I remember, I mentioned this Frankie character. It's the same world as this Frankie character. So I'm kind of like giving you some background before I actually get to the whole Frankie storyline.
Okay. Is there a set number of books to tell the story of this world that you want to, or are you just going to keep writing in this world until you run out of ideas?
I keep writing in this world till I run out of ideas. At the very least, I'm going to keep writing until I do the Frankie series. But I mean, there's a lot of stuff in it that, like there's four great evils. The Frankie stuff goes on during the second great evil. There's a third and a fourth still yet to come. And as a matter of fact, this Revenant and the Cult sort of touches on a little bit of that. And I also have other books that I've written during this time that I've kind of like put in cold storage that I may also release at some point or another. One of them including a character called Merith, who shows up at the end of the Wizard's Stone, who's a king. And so I kind of like go into a little bit of his backstory as well, but I haven't decided whether I want to release that book or not. So yeah, I got a lot of stuff in this world, and there's a lot of fun stuff in it, and I enjoy kind of like writing in this world.
I really do like the art.
Thank you. That was done by Jason Robinson, as well as the second book. You have the second image in there?
I do.
Yeah. This is also done by Jason Robinson.
I sort of Tree of Life with thorns in the blade. Well, the dagger.
Yeah.
Is this a dagger or sword?
Oh, it's a sword. It's a sword.
Proportionally, it's off for a sword, but
Yeah.
it works for cover art. And I like the symbology of half the tree of life is flourishing and the other half is decrepit.
Yeah. Well, you find out that the witchwood, you find out in the first one that there's a curse on the witchwood. And so we kind of like worked with different ideas. And this is kind of the idea that I came up with, and he liked it. So we went with it. And it sort of symbolizes, like the healthy part of the witchwood and the bad part of the witchwood. And then the bottom is sort of indicative of the secret of what's going on in the witchwood. I mean, it's a lot of it's symbolic. It's not actual, but it is very symbolic. Mm-hmm. So, and I love the way he did this. I love the way he sort of combined all of that.
No, I dig it. So what can you tell us about the main character for the Revenant in the Cult series? Because obviously you did the other duology, but for this one specifically, what can you tell us about the main character?
Well, the main character is the same character as the Revenant in the Tomb. He's Hal Cedric. He's
okay, so it's the same one across all four.
But he does have people help him, and one of them is a mainstay called Herodine, and she's an Alani huntress, who is Alani's kind of like my version of elves. The difference between they're immortal, they're beautiful, but the difference between like the Tolkien-esque elves and my elves is that they have they don't have pointed ears, but they have these very distinct eyes, and they're sort of like very bright, and they almost seem to glow. And of course, being immortal, they're very skilled at certain things, and she is a skilled huntress. She knows how to hunt. She knows how to use a bow. She knows how to use a sword. She is, and she sort of has a short fuse. And then there's another character, and they're called Ro, who is a trapper, and he's kind of like a street urchin that has found another way of living and is living in the Orem, helping a lot of farmers keep the wolves down as well as other vermin from their flocks. And he gets entangled into this, and he's also a spy for the order that Hal Cedric works for, to keep an eye on the evils that seem to be plaguing this world. And he gets embroiled in all of this controversy as well.
Okay. Is there a reason you didn't organize it as a longer series then, instead of, so for read through and reading order?
Well, number one, like I said, this came about as the result. The original Hal Cedric character was going to be a one and done character. And then, like I said, I had people coming up to me on social media saying, out of the blue, out of social media saying, yeah, I'd really love to see more about this character. And I'm like, okay, because I wasn't intending doing any more with them. I had all these other books that I was going to do. So this is kind of like me continuing this character. And the other thing is I'm not 100% sure I really want to do like an extended connected series. I'd rather do like episodic books that you can kind of pick up and read and just finish and just enjoy as a complete book without having to wait for the next book to come out to continue the saga. So this was sort of an anomaly in that I felt like it was two different stories, so I broke it up into two different books. Consequently, the book that I'm working on now, which includes Odo, which is from my second book, or the character from my second book, that actually is turning out to be along the same lines, where it feels like two separate books, but I'm going to this time contain it as a single book. It'll be much longer.
So how long are the Revenant and the Cult books?
Both books are about 55,000 words.
Okay, so pulp era novel size.
Yeah. And I kind of, there's a number of reasons why I split them up. First was, like I said, they felt like two different stories. But also, economy hasn't been good. I figured I'd break them up so that it was easier. People could afford it. They'd have to spend a lot of money to pick up one book, and then the next, then they could pick up the next book when they had the money for the expenditures and all that other stuff. So there was lots of reasons, and I go into the forward of the first book of the series.
So your writing style is more than just inspired by. You're almost taking a cue from some of the pulp era novelists.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. When you get it, I deal with a lot of, or when I go into a lot of these cons, I find that I sell a lot of books in comparison to some of the other people. But my books are like pretty thin, and they're inexpensive. I primarily sell paperbacks. And these guys come up with these huge freaking boat anchor, volumes, and, they might sell 2-3 books, and I'm selling like 40, 50. And I think part of it is that my readership is primarily male. And a lot of them are younger, and those big tomes are kind of intimidating. And the thing is that when you buy a book, you don't know if the book's going to be any good. And so it makes, when they're looking at my book or they're looking at this huge book and wondering where they want to spend their money, they're going to spend their money on the cheaper book that if they like it, they'll get more. But if they spend like anywhere from like 15 to 30 bucks for this big book and they hate it, they're out 15, they're out like $15 to $30, whereas with mine is anywhere from 10 to 15 bucks.
So have you put any consideration into, for people that want something that they can put on their coffee table or in their library that's going to hold up? Have you looked at potentially leather-bound books?
Yes, I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about it, and I might do that in the future. And when I do, it'll be illustrated. It'll be illustrated.
You got to get the same author or the same illustrator that did your bookmarks and your covers.
Yeah, actually, I do have an illustrator of mine. His name's Gary Shipman. I don't know if he's going to be available. I've been playing with this idea, but he's also did a bookmark as well. But he's a Eisner winning artist, Eisner Award winning artist. He does Titan, Mouse, and Might. You ever seen this guy do black and white? He's like a freaking genius. He's just, and he has this sort of dark, sort of macabre undertone to a lot of his drawings that I think really fit my style of writing and some of the subjects that I deal with. So I'm looking into that. Eventually I might do a Kickstarter, but that costs a lot of money. And, I got books I got to get out, but I'm seriously considering that.
Yeah. And they don't really have like a lot of Amazon and Barnes and Noble, their digital sales, when you're buying the print copy, it's print on demand. So the quality isn't quite the same as what you would expect. So they aren't going to hold up. So this would be more something people would get as a staple collector for their bookshelf kind of thing.
Yeah. So I've been looking into that, seriously considering it. But if I'm going to do it, it's like anything. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right. And if I'm going to give somebody a collector's item, I'm going to give them something that is worth the money. I did this the same way with my audiobooks. I went and I found the guy, and I made a great choice. I went and found the guy whose voice matched my writing, and boy, did I nail that one. And it's the same thing here. I think if I'm going to do a hardbound edition, I want to get an artist whose style matches my writing, and I just do it right. So, but that type of thing costs money and time and effort. So, but yeah, I'm seriously considering it.
Okay, so we've talked about the main character for the 2 books in this duology. Are there any secondary characters who you really dig?
A lot of people really like Tulgir, who's kind of like my dwarf analog in my world. I'm going to be doing. I have another book that I want to do with him and a different sort of Halcedric like character. And Ro, I'm actually considering giving him his own book. So I like common people. I don't, a lot of fantasy authors like to get into kings and princes and all this other stuff. I just like common people. Common people doing extraordinary things, and Ro is very common.
So you like the everyman?
Yeah, the everyman, exactly.
So the reason people like to do the the fantasy kings and knights and lords. It's because
Mhm.
one, if you wanted to be realistic, the life of the peasant, I
Mhm.
mean, there's nothing anybody would want to read. It's kind of, it sucks. So you're already dealing with, to make it interesting, extraordinary people.
Yeah.
Now there are ways to do that and make it an interesting story, you know, where they rise above their station.
Exactly.
But people like easy. Well, he's a king, so of course he's going to go on a quest to save his kingdom, because otherwise he can't collect taxes and live the fat life.
Well, I mean, if you take a look at it, the granddaddy of all, which was the Lord of the Rings, and the Hobbit, you get right down to it. Bilbo Baggins is basically just a middle class sort of, middle class sort of guy who just likes to hang out in his house and smoke his pipe. And Frodo, Frodo. Go ahead.
You forgot that he likes to eat, which is why we all love him so much.
Yeah, but I mean, the hobbits were not exceptional people. And that's one of the reasons why the Lord of the Rings works so well, is because it is centered around the hobbits, and the hobbits end up being this catalyst, this driving force for the entire story. And Tolkien really nailed that one on the head, because he knew that ordinary people doing fantastic things is the most thrilling. It's not kings and princes; it's the ordinary guy who rises above his normal mundane life and does things like Bull Roarer Took. Bull Roarer Took was a big deal because he was a hobbit, but he rose above being a hobbit to be this sort of fearsome warrior who cut off the head of a goblin and created golf at the same time.
And the experience that Tolkien had on the Solemn, I have to imagine watching, the rank and file of, the average man from England. Yeah. Like I imagine that had to profoundly affect the way he viewed humanity. So, I mean, I think that's a good thing that that he shows the everyman. I enjoy those stories too. This reading about the special squirrels and the super secret, top tier operator types can be fun on occasion. But if I'm going to write it, I'd rather write, the, farmer from Wisconsin who just turned out to be a badass when presented with the right opportunity and situation. So you mentioned you did your elves with no ears. What made you decide to break from the time-honored elfish ears tradition?
It had more to do with, I really didn't care about how they looked, only that, or let me back up here. Eyes are kind of like the windows to the soul. And, because a lot of what's in my world sort of revolves around my Christian identity, and that the Ilani are a living embodiment of living in grace, and the eyes are kind of like the windows to the soul, and so their whatever grace exists should show through the eyes. In my opinion, it is just one of those types of things that sort of evolved. Whereas humans are sort of like finding their way, and they have to, I don't want to say they have to earn their grace, but their grace is given to them. The Ilani are sort of these perfect people who live under grace and do so in a perfect way. And so it shows through their eyes. And of course, because you live in grace, you live forever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of where it comes from. And I know I'm not explaining that really well, but that's part of it. But it has to do with the eyes being the windows of the soul.
So you made that change to the elves. Did you do anything special or different for your series for your dwarfs?
Yes, but I'm going to bring that up at a separate time. Suffice to say, a lot of what goes on in my world has to do somewhat with genetics. And then there's other things like the Yerk, who are kind of like my orcs. But I sort of avoided one of the quandaries that Tolkien had when he created the orcs, in that because the orcs were once elves, are they not redeemable? And he sort of like caught himself in a quandary there, because he sort of made these orcs irredeemable, but they were once elves. And of course, his Catholic faith is that everybody is somehow redeemable. Well, you find out, and that is kind of giving something away, you find out that a lot of the creatures that exist, the evil creatures that exist, are creatures that are life without a soul. Their life, they have a life that is done outside of the creative power of the Allfather, and so they lack a soul. So the Yerk are basically, I don't want to say what's the word for it, but they're not like robots, but they have a mind. They're cunning, but they do not have a soul.
They're not automatons. Is that the word?
Automatons, yeah. I want to automatons, animatronics. Animatronics is Disney. Automatons. That's the word.
So you mentioned that you hung out with some of the Iron Age folks, which is definitely storytelling. It's right up there with noble, bright fiction in that it tries to have a positive message. Would you consider the Revenant and the Cult series in the universe that it happens in to be Iron Age when you classify the?
Yeah, and some of the Iron Age. I mean, I'm in there. A lot of the Iron Age guys are very much influenced by pulp. The sort of the pulp fantasy and whatnot. And I'm very, I'm close to a lot of them, and a lot of them are fans of my books. But the other one, it's mine has a very positive message, even though it's covered under layers of grit. So I mean, I'm a big believer in good wins out over evil, even though maybe a battle, evil wins here, good eventually wins in the end.
Okay. So there's a light at the end of the tunnel, even when it gets gritty.
Yeah.
Okay. You did say this was fantasy. So is there a magic system of some sort?
Yes, and I don't ever explain it.
Okay.
My feeling is that there's some that they talk about the hard magic system, soft magic system. I'm a big believer in the arcane, that magic should be sort of like undefinable or poorly defined and obscure. And this is something that I do with the Odo character in the Wizard Stone and in the next book that I'm writing. It is something that is usually not obtainable for most people. But in my world, wizards are this kind of goes back to Tolkien. Wizards are sort of angelic, and that the magic is endowed in them by the Allfather. Odo is the exception to that, where he takes on some of the power from one of the wizards and is able to do magic. And that's something that's also expounded on in the next book that I'm writing, which also includes Odo. So, but I don't go into a lot of I don't go into Brandon Sanderson like details about the magic system. In my opinion, a lot of it should remain arcane, should kind of remain sort of mysterious. And this also goes for the dark sorcerers, who it's one of the next book sort of explains where dark magic comes from, sort of.
So would you say that the average rank and file citizen of this world is aware of the magic, or is it something that's kept hidden?
Some of them are aware of it. It's more mythological. But the closer you get to a wizard, the more you begin to realize that, quote, magic is real. But it's not really magic. It's sort of power endowed into a wizard.
Okay.
In this way, it's very Tolkien-esque. I mean, Gandalf, Saruman, they were all angelic divine creatures. And so when they came over to Middle-earth, they had knowledge and craft and understanding and were able to apply, quote, their magic, unquote, in that manner. And it's along the same lines. I just don't go into that kind of depth and detail.
Any plans at some future point of writing a character who happens to be a wizard, or are you going to keep it?
Oh, yeah, I already have. I mean, the Wizard's Stone is about a character that becomes a wizard. And the next book expounds on he's much later in his life where he has mastered a lot of mastered magic, quote unquote, and is sort of put to the task of proving what he can do. And that's the one I'm working on right now, which would be my 5th book.
Would you say this is a sword and shield style fantasy or a spear and sandal kind of pre
sword and shield?
Sword and shield.
All of my stuff is sword and shield.
Did you use sort of as the basis? Because there's kind of two schools of thought. Some people use medieval Europe because, that's the Western sphere. Other people intentionally make their fantasy nations other than that, just to be different. So a lot of Indian and Chinese and other places inspiring the stories. Did you have anything in particular when you were designing the worlds?
Well, I always have a big bone contention when anybody says, medieval fantasy, because a lot of the elements of, quote, medieval fantasy exist in every other culture. Castles, swords, spears, shields, armor, dragons, monsters, ghosts, all that stuff. They all exist in other cultures. The only thing that differs is whatever culture you're in. What I do is I'll take different cultures and I will throw them together. Matter of fact, the first book, the Revenant, the Cult, book 1, I had an editor on it, and it was kind of funny because he was writing little notes. He was telling me about little notes in the margin about how medieval peasants wouldn't talk like this or act like this or live in these types of conditions. And I just sort of chuckled because all those things that he was pointing out that medieval peasants don't do were things I intentionally did not put in. So like the Revenant and the Cult, the first book, takes place in an area that would be similar to the Great Plains. So when I set up, the world, I incorporated not only what, maybe some medieval farmer might do, but I'd also throw in elements of what, settlers in the 1800s would live through. Sod houses, houses made of clay, stone, stuff like that. And, they'd adapt to their environment. So I take different things and I mix them in to create what I would consider a new culture or a new environment for people to live in. So I wouldn't call it medieval fantasy. I would say it was taking from a lot of different things. I also pull from a Native American stuff too. And I'll throw it in there. You just don't know it.
Okay. Would you live in this world if you could?
Yeah, they got steak.
Okay.
Now, if they had coffee and cigars, definitely.
So is that something that, some authors, I feel like, for instance, a friend of the show, Melissa McShane, she deserves trigger warning, will make you hungry in her books because she always writes food and she writes food well. And so like, I'm just saying I'd like to get invited to one of her cookouts because it just sounds like it's banging. But is yours one of those ones since you mentioned steak where they're going to be like, oh man, this book is bad for the diet?
Yeah, well, probably. I mean, I like to go into like little things like, what they eat while they're traveling, parched corn, or they make cakes out of, various cakes out of grain, or, stew when they're at one of the homesteads, or horse bread, trapper's loaf. There's all of these little details that I like to throw in there as kind of like asides that give it, I think, a full rounded, sort of like makes it feel real. And food is one of them. How people live, how they dress, all that stuff. It makes a difference. It gives you a sense that the world is lived in.
One of the things fantasy authors never get is the forever stew. Are you familiar with the concept?
No.
The never-ending pot, I guess, is the other way people have described it, where they'll make their stew and they eat it and there's leftovers. They don't dump the leftovers. They have no refrigeration to save it. They just add more meat, more stuff, and keep cooking. So in some instances, the pot could be going for years. There was right up until probably Waterloo in the 1800s in France, there was supposedly one inn that had a pot that had been going for hundreds of years.
Yep.
Obviously, I can't. It was in modern-day Normandy, where in France, but like obviously we can't verify the age of that, but the concept exists. And I've never seen anyone write about that kind of neat function of the era.
Yeah, I haven't done that yet. I kind of like I don't go into that sort of detail. I might one day, but I don't go into that sort
I
of
mean,
detail.
I'll just have one assassin poison the stew because they wanted this guy to eat it. And now you've just destroyed, hundreds of years of seasoning on that pot, and or you made people afraid of the forever stew. So now there's so much waste because they got to keep remaking things, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's lots of ways you could work it into a plot where it makes it kind of cool.
Well, the other thing I'm like with this next book that I'm doing, my fifth book, I started getting into different things like mead.
Nice.
Yeah, so I incorporate mead into that. This region has mead, whereas a lot of the other regions have wine and ale. They don't incorporate, fruits are a little bit more accessible with like this, because it's in a northern realm. What they do is they preserve a lot of their fruits and whatnot into a mead along with honey. So little things like that, because, if you have a long, hard winter, you need to preserve whatever harvest you get. So, I kind of like, I really try to change up. I really try to change up sort of the details depending upon what region of the world you're in.
Okay. Is there anything we didn't ask about this universe? And we will link to the universe page in the show notes, dear listener. Is there anything we didn't ask that you feel like the listeners need to know about this world?
No, I think we pretty much covered everything. And I'm notorious for not trying to give away spoilers.
No, that's absolutely good. Do you have any plans for audiobook? Because I know I listen.
Oh, yes. Every single book goes out with an audiobook. It's narrated by Steve Fortune, who is an actor in the UK. And as people will tell you, he nails my writing right to the wall. He's a perfect fit for all of my books. And how this guy is not bigger in the fantasy market, I have no idea, because he's perfect. He's perfect for fantasy. He just does a great job. But yeah, all of my books, he's done all four of my books. He will most likely do my next one. And the thing about you can get my audiobooks pretty much everywhere. They're available on audio or available on Audible. They're also available on Spotify. And if you have a Spotify premium account, you have access to all of them. Now, here's the nice thing about my audiobooks on Spotify. I think Spotify premium account, you get 16 hours a month to listen to whatever audiobooks you want. Most of these audiobooks are like 25, 48 hours long. Mine are all like sub 10 hours. So you could listen to 2 of my books over a month and still have some time left over. So you're not buying a book and listening to it for the next 3 months. You can actually listen to a complete book and get through it and start on the next one.
Okay. Is this book, because you do have all the formats, so is this book wide or is it Amazon exclusive?
It's wide. You can find it anywhere. You can find it in Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Actually, all of my books are wide. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kobo, you name it, you can find it.
Okay. Same for the audiobook. I mean, all
Same
of it?
For all of it. So, as a matter of fact, one of them is the one big one that I try and promote is Chirp, which is an audiobook alternative to Audible. And unlike Audible, where you do a subscription system, you actually buy the book from Chirp. You can also get the ebook on Smashwords, and you can also purchase the book. You can also purchase paperback not only from Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and any other place that sells paperbacks, but I also have my own store, which you can access from my website, www.hphunterwriter.com.
We'll link all that in the show notes. So All right. Well, this is the part of the interview, dear listener, where I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right books. So do your part, people. It really does make a big difference, especially with independent creators who exist by word of mouth. So, leave a review, tell everyone how awesome it was. It's greatly appreciated. With that, Herman, how can listeners and viewers find you? And as usual, we will link to all the things in the show notes.
You can find me on, of course, you can subscribe to my website, which is www.hphunterwriter.com, all one word. You can subscribe to that, and you'll get periodic newsletter or updates from me there via email. You can find me on X, Gab, Getter, Minds, Facebook. I'm sitting here looking at my tabs. I also have a YouTube channel, HP, called the Lore Forge, Herman P. Hunter's Lore Forge on YouTube. So I mean, I'm all over the place there as well.
Okay. You can find us, dear listener, if you want to check us out, at our link tree, which is linktr.ee, linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast. Again, linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast, where we link to all the things, the BitChutes, the Rumbles, the YouTubes, the TikToks, the Twitters. We have our Spotify website. We have our Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. For professional purposes only, people. Save the shenanigans from Stabby Stab over there on the Instagram, the Twitters, and the email. If you want to support the show, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section this for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee, bring coffee till it pours out of their eyeballs, people. And if you use the link in the show notes, code PODCASTGRUNTS, you get 10% off. We get a little bit of a kickback. It's a win-win, people. And it really does make a difference to help keep the overhead defrayed. And with that, I would like to thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time. We'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. And with that, we're going to hit the end button, people.